We always talk about those lone Neanderthals, right? And us, the triumphant Homo sapiens. But what if that's not the whole story?
Yeah, what if it's completely wrong?
What if our development, like who we are today, is actually because of some ancient collaboration?
Like a cultural mashup going way, way back.
Exactly. I'm talking Neanderthals and Homo sapiens.
Fascinating, right? And the crazy thing is there's new research coming out of Tinshemet Cave in Israel that's showing just that.
Tinshemet Cave, huh? I haven't heard of that one.
It's pretty new, actually. This is the first published study we're looking at today, and it's in Nature Human Behavior.
Nice. Very cool.
Yeah.
So who's behind this research?
Well, you've got Professor Yossi Zaidner from the Hebrew University of Jerusalem.
Okay.
Then there's Professor Israel Hershkovitz at Tel Aviv University and Dr. Marion Prevost, also at the Hebrew University.
Gotcha. So a real team effort.
Definitely. And they've been digging at this cave since 2017, so they've got some serious data.
Yeah. Wow, since 2017. So for everyone listening today, we're going deep into this study to see what it tells us about Neanderthals and Homo sapiens hanging out together in the Levant.
Yeah, exactly. Back in the Middle Paleolithic. So
Yeah.
think like 130,000 to 80,000 years ago.
Ancient history, right?
Mhm.
And this is really going to make us rethink what we thought we knew about how these early humans were interacting.
It is for sure.
Okay, so we've always thought of Neanderthals and Homo sapiens as separate groups,
Yeah.
right? Maybe even competing for resources.
Exactly.
But this new research is saying not so fast.
Right. It's making us ask, were they actually rivals battling it out? Were they just kind of separate neighbors doing their own thing? Or was there something way more complex going on?
Like maybe working together.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Like ancient teamwork. It's a real mystery, and this Tinshemet Cave might hold the answers.
Okay, I'm intrigued. So where is this cave exactly?
So it's in central Israel in a region called the Levant.
Yeah.
Archaeologically, it's a real hot spot.
Yeah, I can imagine.
But what makes Tinshemet so special is that they found so many ancient tools and human remains there. It's a gold mine.
Wow. It's not just like a couple of tools and bones, right? This is a big deal.
Oh, yeah. It's a huge deal. They actually found the first Middle Paleolithic burials in the whole region for over 50 years.
No way. Really?
Yeah, and the best part is that archaeological layers they're digging through go back like 110,000 years.
So we're talking a really long window into these early humans' lives.
Exactly. A window that's still wide open, too.
I love it. Okay, so what in these layers is actually telling us about this idea that they were sharing technology and stuff?
Well, the stone tools are a big clue. They call them lithic artifacts,
Oh.
and they're seeing that these tools were made using the same techniques by both the Neanderthals and the Homo sapiens living there at the time.
So it wasn't like they had completely different ways of making tools?
Nope. They were using the same know-how to shape those stones into sharp edges and useful shapes.
Huh. So they had a shared understanding of problem solving and using what they had.
Right. It's fascinating. But the study goes even deeper than that.
How so?
Well, they're not just looking at the types of tools. They're looking at how they were made. Like the specific striking techniques, the angles, the types of stone they used.
Gotcha.
And they're figuring out what those tools were likely used for, particularly for hunting.
So it's the whole process from raw material to finished tool to its purpose.
Precisely. And it all points to them having very similar daily practices, the things they did to survive.
That's so cool. It's like they were living very similar lives. But those burials, right? That's really what got me thinking.
I know, right? It's a huge discovery, and it tells us their relationship was way more than just living in the same area.
So how do those burial customs indicate such a strong connection between these two groups?
Well, think about it. Burial practices are usually tied to really deep beliefs. A group's whole social fabric, their understanding of life and death, big stuff. So when you see similar burial practices between Neanderthals and Homo sapiens, it means there was a shared cultural understanding or a real exchange of ideas about some pretty fundamental things.
Wow. And they found a cluster of these burials in Tinshemet Cave, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So do we think this was a specific place they both considered sacred? Maybe like an early cemetery?
That's the million-dollar question.
Okay.
Could Tinshemet Cave have been a designated burial site for both groups?
I mean, if that's true, it suggests they weren't just bumping into each other now and then, right?
Absolutely. It points to a more established connection, maybe even a ritualized connection to this place.
And there were artifacts found in these burial pits, right? Like things buried with them.
There were. They found stone tools, animal bones, and chunks of ochre.
So what does that tell us? I mean, these are objects placed there intentionally.
Well, it's tricky to interpret, for sure, but it could mean they had early forms of symbolic thought,
Interesting.
maybe even beliefs about what happens after death, a concept we usually associate with Homo sapiens.
And now we might be seeing it in a context shared with Neanderthals. That's really blurring the lines.
Definitely. It's challenging those old assumptions.
And speaking of blurring the lines, you mentioned ochre earlier. What's so important about finding a lot of this mineral pigment at Tinshemet Cave?
Well, ochre's a natural pigment, right? And it's not always used for practical things.
Like what?
Well, they could have been using it to decorate their bodies, maybe as self-expression or to show their group identity.
Interesting.
So if both Neanderthals and Homo sapiens at Tinshemet were using ochre in similar ways, it could show they had a shared way of thinking about symbols.
Right, like a way to see who they were or who they belonged to.
Yeah, exactly. And the sheer amount of ochre they found really highlights how important it might have been.
Wow. So it's more than just two separate groups occasionally running into each other, right? This sounds like something much bigger.
Yeah, the study actually suggests these interactions really drove some big developments.
Okay, explain that. What kind of developments are we talking?
Well, they think these interactions in the Levant between Neanderthals, pre-Neanderthals, and early Homo sapiens helped them share knowledge and skills.
Makes sense.
And they think over time this led to what they call cultural homogenization.
Cultural homogenization. So like their technologies and daily routines started to blend together.
Exactly. They started becoming more similar.
Fascinating.
And they think this blending of cultures is tied to them developing more complex social structures and new behaviors.
Interesting. So like what kind of new behaviors?
Well, one example they point to is formal burial customs appearing around 110,000 years ago in Israel. And get this, that could be the earliest evidence of formal burials anywhere in the world.
Wow, that's huge.
Yeah, it is. And they think these intensified social interactions might have led to that development.
It's like that melting pot idea, right? Different groups coming together and sharing their cultures.
Exactly. And Dr. Prebos talks about how the Levant's location made it a natural crossroads for human migrations.
So it was like a central meeting point.
Right. And she points out that around this time, the climate was improving, which probably made the region more hospitable.
So more people could live there.
Exactly. More people, more interactions, more cultural exchange.
It all adds up. And I remember one of the researchers actually used that melting pot phrase. I think it was Professor Zadner.
Professor Zadner had a great quote about it. He said, "Our data show that human connections and population interactions have been fundamental in driving cultural and technological innovations throughout history."
Powerful stuff.
Yeah.
So he's really highlighting how important these interactions were for shaping early human development.
Definitely. He sees the Levant as a place where these groups were constantly learning from each other and evolving together.
It's like a constant back and forth of ideas and innovations.
Exactly. And what about Professor Hershkovitz? What were his big takeaways?
Yeah, what did he focus on?
Well, he emphasized how interconnected their daily lives were. You know, those similarities in their survival strategies and how they adapted to the environment. It points to some deep connections.
Right. They were all dealing with the same challenges.
Exactly. But he also made a good point that these interactions weren't always peaceful.
I mean, that makes sense, right? It's hard to imagine everyone getting along perfectly all the time.
Yeah, there was probably a mix of cooperation and competition for resources. It wasn't a simple story.
It never is. So what's the big takeaway here for our listeners?
Well, the big thing is this. Neanderthals and Homo sapiens in the Levant, back then, they weren't living totally separate lives. The evidence from Tinshemet Cave is telling us they were sharing technology, daily routines, and even those deeply meaningful burial rituals.
So much more than just living in the same place, right?
Way more. This is about cultural exchange on a significant level. It was a much more complex and intertwined relationship than we ever thought.
And the Levant wasn't just some random place. This was a crucial hub for human evolution.
It was a melting pot of cultures and ideas, and those interactions seem to have really pushed early human development forward.
And the crazy thing is, this is just the beginning, right? They're still digging at Tinshemet Cave.
Exactly. Who knows what they'll find next? It's so exciting to think about.
Every new discovery could rewrite the story again.
It's a reminder that we're always learning and refining our understanding of the past.
So as you're thinking about all of this, I want you to consider something. If cooperation and cultural exchange were so important for our earliest ancestors, what does that say about us today?
Right. What does it mean for innovation and progress in our world now?
It really makes you think about the power of collaboration and how much we can achieve when we work together.
It's a powerful lens to view not only our history, but also our future.
Absolutely. Thanks for taking this deep dive with us today.
It's been a pleasure.
And for everyone listening, until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep digging deeper into the mysteries of our shared human story.
And don't forget those Neanderthals.